Allison is a seventh-generation Floridian who lives in Tallahassee. He was a longtime adjunct faculty member of the University of Miami Law School. In addition to his law degree, he holds an MA in criminology and a doctorate in theology. Dr. DeFoor began his legal career in the Florida Keys, serving as an assistant public defender and in the state attorney's office. In 1982, he was elected judge of Monroe County Court, serving until 1988 when he was elected to be the Monroe County sheriff. Shortly after that, he was tapped by Governor Bob Martinez and ran with Governor Martinez as lieutenant governor. He's also served Governor Jeb Bush's Everglades czar and the Kristen Scott administration in very key environmental roles. And most interestingly, he's an Episcopal priest whose parish is inside the Wakulla Correctional Institute. Very good. Dr. DeFoor.
Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Seventh generation Floridian, that mostly anybody in Florida before mosquito control and air conditioning was probably running from something, so I don't think that makes me royalty. The Representative Albritton and I were swapping stories last night. Our families both come from the Peace River Valley, and we were talking about our roots a lot. I'm not sure we've got as much disagreement as perhaps Tom Feeney might want. Tom and I belong to that very exclusive fraternity of people who've gotten their butts beat for Lieutenant Governor of Florida. It's an interesting club. Mel Martinez belongs, Kurt Kaiser, there's some interesting folks in that club. My mission today is to try and convince y'all that there might be more good in this amendment than there is bad, and I think that's probably about the best I can do under the circumstances. And it's not quite as radical as it might seem, and it really kind of restores us to something we've been doing since the late 1960s, and every governor since then, Republican or Democrat, good or bad, has been part of it, and to try and get us back into where we were. And it's not all about hugging trees, because at the end of the day, that's our driver for the economy of Florida. The environment, there's no state in the union, with the possible exception of Hawaii and Alaska, where the economy and the environment are more intertwined than our state is. This state changes a lot. We get about 1,000 people a day moving here, about 1,500, and that's not really true. It's 1,500 a day moving, about 500 a day dying or moving out. So it's very dynamic. And so let me begin, since although I know a lot of people in this room, I don't know everybody, by claiming my bona fides. I am not some tree-hugging, granola-eating, Volvo-driving, Birkstock-wearing liberal. I have been on the board of directors of Associated Industries. I was on the executive board of this organization for 3 years. I was on the board of this organization for 6 years. I've been a board member of Florida Tax Watch, of the Florida Chamber Foundation. I have indeed also been a member of the board of 1,000 Friends of Florida and the Florida Audubon. I don't know quite now how I get on these boards of people that hate each other, but it was kind of fun during Amendment 4, I must confess. I had the best seat in the House. But I've been vice chairman of the Republican Party of Florida, and I was Governor Martinez's running mate. But my family has been here for 7 generations to me and 9 to my grandchildren, and we have a deep love of the environment of Florida, and that's really what convinced me to redirect myself out of where most of my life has gone these days, which is to prison. And a lot of politicians end up in prison. A lot of them don't get out as easily as I do. But they asked me to come chair this thing, and as I looked at it, I thought it was really the poster boy for how one of these amendments could be put together. I've got to give, John Mills and I don't agree on, frankly, a damn thing politically, but he is a very good lawyer, and he put this thing together very carefully and in a textbook way of how you would want an amendment like this put together. It takes, as you know, it takes 1/3 of the documentary stamp tax revenue and devotes it to land conservation and water conservation, broadly speaking, and I mean very, very broadly speaking. It has a 20-year duration. It sunsets itself, which is, I think, to its credit. It is tied to percentage instead of a fixed amount, so you don't lock yourself in, as we did with, say, the net ban, where things become very difficult if the situation becomes fluid to change it. It restores us to it's reasonable, I think, in its request. At one point, up to a little over half of the documentary stamp tax revenues were going into these broad purposes, and so a third is a reasonable number. It's a relatively small percentage of the state's overall budget, and it goes to the very heart of what it is for Florida's economy and its environment. If we don't have water, we're out of business. We're out of all business, not just conservation. We're out of the economic business as well. And it restores us to something we've been doing since 1967. The first tying of the documentary stamps to conservation purposes, broadly speaking, including parks, was done in 1967, 68 in the Kirk administration, and continued on from there for the next 40 years without interruption. Under Governor Martinez, my old running mate, the Preservation 2000 program came in. A lot of local initiatives came in under following the successes of that. Governor Bush extended it as well. As the fellow who owns the Tradewind Resorts in St. Petersburg Beach came with us to the Tampa Tribune editorial board, which we were successful. We were not successful with the Tampa Times. I don't quite know how, Tampa Bay Times, I don't know quite now how that happened. I called Mark Wilson. I said, don't you feel really bad about being in bed with the St. Pete Times on this thing? But he said he didn't. We ended up, what he said, I think, captures it quite well, which is this is about protecting the franchise and protecting the brand. And so that's why the Hotel and Restaurant Association has gone in favor of this amendment. And it'll produce about $500 and some odd million this year, which is, and if it goes up, if the economy goes up, as we would all hope it would go up from there. If the economy goes down, as we all, I think, fear it may, it would go down from there. So that's a broad outline of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions either before or after Representative Albritton. I know he's got some concerns. There are some legitimate concerns here. I've written articles on Florida's constitutional law with footnotes. In law review articles, I actually get the concerns here. They're not misplaced. They're reasonable concerns. I just think this amendment has been carefully crafted to address them. If it passes, and the polling would suggest that it is in pretty good shape, and there doesn't appear as yet, knock on wood, to be any really seriously organized opposition against it. And I think that's because most Floridians in their heart get it. If it passes, one of the other charms of this is it doesn't dismantle any of the existing statutory schemes for the distribution of this kind of money, which is very important. I'm old enough to have remembered that 2 secretaries of what's now Environmental Protection left that building in handcuffs because of land buying efforts. And the ARC and all of these carefully constructed mechanisms for distributing this kind of money would be left in place. And ultimately, this really doesn't bind, as you know, the legislature's hands. They have a great deal of ability to do whatever they will with this. I just hope that and I believe that they will listen to what I think will be the will of the people expressed in this election. So the real answer to what will this be if it passes is, what do you want it to be? Kind of like what do we want Florida to be? We're at a real, and I'll close with this, it's a little philosophical, but we're at a real turning point for Florida in the next few years as we grow up as a state. We moved so far, so fast, that we're just now really entering our adulthood as a state, as a megastate. In my mother's day, Florida was the smallest and poorest state in the South. Think about that for a second. At the beginning of World War II, we were smaller and poorer than Mississippi and considered to have fewer prospects than Mississippi and Arkansas because our soils were poor and we had no air conditioning. World War II changed all of that, and the state began a takeoff that we're just now cashing really in. But it's taking us from, in 20 years, the length of this amendment, we will have the population of Texas. We'll have about 25, 26, 27 million people on the footprint of North Carolina. How we manage that is going to be really, really critical. If we do it right, it'll be like Central Park. The setting aside of some conservation land in the central part of New York might have seemed to some folly, but it's produced the highest land values in the world on its periphery, and I don't think anyone in New York considers that to be a bad investment. That's the kind of investment we need to make for Florida in the next 20 years to be the really great state that we have the capabilities of being. If we don't do it, when these assets are gone, like Kissington Springs and Bartow, they'll be gone forever. And with water, that could be particularly problematic economically, which I know is of interest to this group. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Representative, I defer to you or whoever's in charge, and if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll Senator speak, and then we'll have some questions. Great. The senator will speak, and then we'll have some time for some questions. I just have one question. 7 generations. Allison, 7 generations takes us back how far? 1829. Whoa. It's my pleasure to introduce Representative Ben Albritton from Bartow, Florida. Representative Albritton attended Florida Southern College, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in citrus and business. After graduation, family agriculture business includes citrus, grove ownership, grove care and management, payroll management, a general line insurance agency, as well as risk and horticultural consulting. He was first elected in 2010 and subsequently re-elected to the Florida House of Representatives. He serves on the Economic and Tourism Subcommittee, the Business and Professional Regulation Subcommittee, State Affairs Committee, Appropriations Committee, and is chair of the Ag and Natural Resources Appropriation Subcommittee. Representative Albritton.
Good morning. Well, that was pretty perky. We're good. We're doing good. You know, I used to really, Allison, I certainly appreciated the opportunity to spend time with you last night and get to meet you and spend time swapping stories. And I used to be really excited about being a 5th-generation Floridian. And now, you know, here we go. Now I've got to compete with 7th. First thing I'd like to do is I'd like to thank AIF. I think it's incredibly important that we are spending time as a group of concerned folks talking about water, spending time and resources and energy and thought about what water resources here in the state should look like, what we should be doing with those, and then what the future should look like. That's certainly important. And I'd like to thank every one of you, because what you've done is you've taken time out of your schedule to come up here and be a part of this process. You've taken time to learn, to participate, and certainly to be a part of this. I want to start through this. Allison made some very valid points, and quite frankly, I think if we'll start in the right place, then we'll work our way through this, and you can understand effectively, pretty clearly, where I stand on this and why. So we can start with this. I suspect if we polled this group, every one of us would be interested in conservation. Every one of us would be interested in making sure that we don't waste resources. Every one of us would be interested in a very prosperous and wonderful future for Florida. So when it boils down to the question of Amendment 1, you have to ask some questions. At least I have. And I believe that it's fair to ask the questions that we're going to talk about. Now, if we start with the foundation that we want conservation to be important, we want to invest in it, and we want Florida's future to be good. We want our water to be clean. We want our kids to be able to be proud of the natural resources that we have here. You have to think about not the why. We understand the why very clearly. It's the how. First of all, when I share with you my thoughts, they're simply mine. And you can, take them how you will. But I've always been taught my whole life that, you need to think Don't just follow a party or follow anybody else. I feel like I get elected to think. Secondly, just tell the truth, tell what you believe, just say it very clearly. I believe that Amendment 1 is a response to our recession. For years, we as a state invested money into our natural resources for conservation to the tunes of, say, $300 million a year. That was good. However, I also remember when I first got elected, we had some fairly significant financial challenges. I remembered the scuttle and the challenges we had. Am I close to being done already?
Oh, no, sir. Yep.
Gosh, I just got, okay, good. Made me nervous. I'm only 1 out of 10. Wow, okay. Anyhow, we had some real challenges. I suspect you remember that. Cutting $4 billion out of our budget, it's a lot. It's a big challenge. But to be good financial stewards, that was important for us. So I believe what has happened is that not that the legislature has lost the will to invest in conservation, invest in water resources, invest in the quantity and quality of water that our state has the blessing of every day. But I believe it's a matter of timing, so that's problematic for me. I would hope it'd be problematic for you. So we go through this opportunity, or we go through this timeline of having good financial resources and we invest them, and then we go through the recession, and then all of a sudden we're forced to make some very hard decisions. So do we invest in purchasing land? I mean, really, ultimately, that's the question. Do we invest in purchasing land, or do we fund schools? Or do we fund health care? Or do we fund anything else? One of 8 or 10 major decisions and important prospects and points to fund here in the state. And what I would say is that yes, conservation is important, but as we went through the recession, we made the decisions that were correct. We put people first. Yes, the environment's important. I'm a farmer. Frequently I drive through our properties and I take a look, and we border wetlands and we have uplands, and we get to share in the environment. And it means a lot to me. It does. Because I recognize how precious it is and how having a pristine environment means something. It creates value. But at the same time, we invested in people through this process, through our funding process, and not the environment, quite frankly. And I wouldn't change that today. So there's just a few points specifically about Amendment 1 that I believe to be a challenge. Things that we should consider as we're going into the polling places of our various communities and we're casting a vote for or against this amendment. The first is that, and just in fair disclosure, I spent a decent amount of time on the website for this amendment, looking through and reading the argument, basically, that they're presenting to Floridians, Florida voters, about what this is and what it means and how important it is. Granted, it is important. Conservation is important, but quite frankly, I feel like that many of the arguments, the discussions, the talking points on the website are intellectually dishonest. Number one, this is not new money. And I think that's very, very important. Because today, dock stamp revenue is a set amount of money that it's funding programs. It's utilized today. It's not sitting in a bank account somewhere and can just be summoned at will. So ultimately what's going to happen is at least it's from my perspective, is that if this amendment passes, a third of the dock stamps are going to be used for 20 years for conservation and for various things, many of which are undefined, well, quite frankly, in statute. It's going to be used for various things and taken away from other programs. This isn't a new pot of money. Second of all, please excuse me. I read an article 2009 that has had significant impact on the way I view the world. It was profound to me, profound. Now, you'll remember in 2009, we were pretty much at the peak of the recession. At least we were really feeling the significant impact of it. Job losses were great. Budgets were being crimped everywhere. Losses were being taken. Lives were being changed. So in 2009, this article pops up. A friend of mine sent it to me. The name of the article was "Who Killed California?" You can Google it yourself. It's a very thoughtful article. Who killed California? Now, we could talk about the history of Florida. We can talk about how wonderful our natural resources are, how we should be focused on making sure that the days of the past are protected for the days of the future. But here's one thing we can't measure today. We'll only be able to measure it in the future. And that is, what happens when you start the momentum of putting into the state constitution measures that tie the hands of the legislature as it relates to the budget? Who killed California? In 2009, California's legislature had their hands tied so greatly, they were on the brink of bankruptcy. Because for years, what had happened is, in the previous years, what had happened is they had done measures much like this one. Constitutional amendments that required them to spend money at certain levels out of certain pots for a certain timeline. So when the times got tough, where were they? They were here. So they couldn't make choices. They couldn't make hard decisions. They couldn't do what was best for the long term for California in a general sense because their hands had been tied. Now, I don't want to see us do that. Do I support conservation? Absolutely. It's what farmers do. But I don't want to see us start down a slippery slope as a state to putting into the Constitution what we're supposed to do as a legislature in our budget. I think it's grossly unfair to the taxpayers of this state. It certainly is unfair to the legislature, and I believe that it's unfair to our future. So what happens if Amendment 1 passes? And all of a sudden we start down that slippery slope. Who's next? Education? So our teachers and our school boards and everybody gets together and they get a petition passed, or all of a sudden they get enough signatures and we're on the ballot to spend X amount of money for education every year regardless of any external pressure, any external circumstances. That's what we have to do. And then who's next? Transportation? Road builders? Are we going to start a petition around the state that says, wow, without good roads, hey, you hate potholes, don't you? I mean, you hate potholes, right? So we need to spend money on transportation. It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. The prospect of putting budgetary constraints in the Constitution of this state is very dangerous. Very dangerous. Going to set a very bad precedent. The last thing is that when you take a look at the way this amendment is written, the only word that I can come up with is poorly, and it's not as critical as it would sound, but I feel like it's poorly written. When you take a look at it, many of the terms, many of the words that are used in crafting this amendment are not defined well in statute. So what does that mean? What does it mean for the Florida legislature? Well, what it means is if this amendment passes, we're going to have to define those things. And look, I don't have a problem in doing that. That's not my issue. The issue is, what if we define them and the folks that supported this don't agree? Much like our redistricting maps. What's going to happen? Litigation? Cost the taxpayer again? Listen. The men and women that support this are honorable folks. But I'm thinking about our future too. And I'm thinking about having a system of government here that can function well, that can operate independently, that can be responsive to our constituents. I mean, gosh, I've been here 4 years. It's been an immense blessing. And if I'm blessed well enough, we'll have 4 more. But then I'm gone. This thing's going to live on. And the future legislatures of this state do not deserve, in my humble opinion, to have their hands tied for whatever purpose. Education, healthcare, environment, conservation, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the process was not set up that way. It was set up that it would be deliberated, that we would debate issues, we would process. I've heard the process defined as making sausage. Yeah, it's probably fair. So what I'd like to finish with is this. I'm a farmer. I'm a conservationist. I get it. I understand it. The folks that lead for these organizations, Sierra Club, Audubon, 1,000 Friends, they spend time in my office. They're friends of mine. And we spend time on these things. We talk about them. But if we're going to talk about the future, let's talk about what this really means for the future. And that is this slippery slope of constitutional amendments that tie the hands of the legislature. That is very dangerous, very dangerous. And it's easy to sit here today and say, well, yeah, but maybe it feels good, or it's the right thing to do, but you really won't know. Will we? We won't know for maybe 10 years. And after maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of these things take place, we just won't know. Precedents make a difference. It's a bad precedent, and I believe it's a bad idea. So anyhow, thanks for humoring me and appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you. So sorry to be a downer.